Anthony is leading blockchain transformations and forming business networks for IBM and its clients across EMEA. He helps clients achieve growth, defines impactful digital strategies, and launches new businesses powered by new technologies such as blockchain, AI, robotics, open platforms, and digital transformation. He is host of the Blockchain Won't Save the World podcast. Over to you, Anthony. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks, Leo. Thanks, Daria. Can you guys see my video by any chance? It doesn't appear to be coming on.
We can't at the moment.
That's very strange. So that's what I look like in still motion. And thank you very much, Leo, for the intro. I do all of the things you described, albeit now from my bedroom, given the current status of working from home and whatnot. It all sounds particularly grand, but thank you very much for the intro. And Daria, thank you very much for the setup. You've very helpfully saved me about 3 or 4 slides worth of content, which I can now get straight into the good stuff. So thank you very much for that. It's almost as if it was planned. So given this is the 3 o'clock slot, at least on UK time, I'm going to deviate somewhat from my traditional case study and in-depth learning and technical architecture analysis type of presentation and give you guys something a little bit lighter. It's still very much in line with what is the relevance of the law, legal, and smart contracts in and around construction, but hopefully a slightly different perspective on where and why and how to care about it. So bear with me while I load up slides. So back to the point that Daria very kindly made, is she's actually been able to outline very much some of the challenges and the structural issues around the construction industry. But as you're thinking through legal smart contracts or smart legal contracts or smart anything in and around the construction sector, the key consideration here is that actually blockchain is not the only technology tool to consider here. And frankly speaking, the more technologies that you integrate or implement, the more opportunity for value, but also the more opportunity for complexity. What blockchain does very, very well is it provides an underlying data infrastructure with some degrees of automation that are particularly useful where you've got multiple parties, many-to-many relationships, et cetera, et cetera. It's been well covered in the sessions prior to mine, so I'm not going to go into it in more detail. But please be mindful as we talk about this, smart contracts are just one component of workflows, and the data or the contractual obligations fitting within those things are just one part of the overall story. And that also at the same time, the real world transformation of actually changing processes on the ground is as hard to do, if not more so, than the actual technology itself. Not taking away from the hard work and the value that our friends in the legal community do, but actually there's an awful lot of challenge and transformation that goes into making these sort of systems production ready and usable in the real world. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that because the last 5 years of my career has been spent working with business networks and consortia to be able to deliver that sort of change. And believe me, it's challenging. The one thing I have learned though from the past 6 months of my career is that it is possible to do from a bedroom. So we have been as IBM bringing together multiple organizations, public and private sector, creating technology-led business networks or consortia to be able to transform or to bring new propositions to the market, some of them being specific to COVID, some of them being specifically relevant to the construction industry, and some of them being broadly relevant across business and across industry. So don't give up just because we're on lockdown. The reality is digital transformation needs to happen regardless of the situation that we're in, and we're all learning to adapt. Another probably interesting observation is that the ability for industry participants to pivot in times of need. They say that that it's very easy to innovate in a crisis because you've got no fallback plan. Particularly in and around COVID or return to work or return to travel or return to entertainment, or trying to keep organizations profitable or still operating. You're seeing car manufacturers convert into medical equipment manufacturers. You're seeing facilities using their spaces or their warehouses for entirely different matters. You're seeing competitors in industries where you're looking at air travel or freight or cargo working together to create virtual clearing houses for supply and demand because they can't manage it all by themselves. And so being able to work together so that they can survive en masse as opposed to all going under individually is really powerful to observe, and take that with you as some evidence that change is possible in times like this. If anything, in some cases, it's even more possible because a number of the barriers or the size of the prize is that much more strong and that much more compelling. So back to blockchain, and This is a flip of the diagram that Daria just showed us before in terms of the integrations and the data flows, not just the contractual flows between parties. And in reality, what we're doing at the moment is we're trying to create a single source of truth, or a reliable source of truth, across a number of different parties. And this is the first of my 2 shameless plugs for today, so apologies for that. But Niels Falk, who is a wonderfully smart guy, he's based in Denmark and does a lot of work with Copenhagen and Copenhagen City. He described it in short form as, we're trying to create a horizontal data chain in a world of vertical information packages, and trying to be able to get information that's current and accessible and usable to be able to figure out where we are, where we stand on a project, or where we are in terms of costs, or what's been approved and completed, is particularly difficult when you have these balkanized platforms, or contractors managing certain parts and not other parts, or a number of different parties coming in and off site. Even though at a base level, digitization is there, integration's not. And so I'd love you guys to go and check. There's an episode, he sort of talks for about 40-45 minutes on how in the Danish construction industry, they've looked at a number of different use cases, that some of which we'll cover today, but others that I probably won't spend the time to, around where they're looking at creating those horizontal data chains. And it's in the areas of sustainability and supply chain, in buildings, in BIM, and a number of the topics we talked about. But he does it with a much more compelling narrative, and also a nicer accent than mine. So please do go check that out. So this is basically what we're trying to work our way towards, is that we've got some common data infrastructure. There'll be a number of different use cases, data types, metadata requirements, inputs, outputs, but a number of the technology principles should remain the same. It should be service-oriented, it should be modular, it should be accessible and permissions to those who have the rights to do it. It should be immutable and tamper-proof and trustworthy. It should be easy to access for the lowest common denominator. These are all a number of the considerations that, frankly, in an individual application, we probably haven't got solved in some of the platforms that we're using today, but should be the default way that we think about it. And the number of parties, the number of individuals or organizations in the ecosystem makes that particularly hard to do. But, and as Daria put about the golden thread throughout all of these things, there is a desperate requirement for an enablement of distributed institutional memory across things like operational risk, particularly in the current situation around getting safe return to work and getting people COVID-free on sites, maintaining social distancing, approvals and safe to work, and certification. Completions and the status of activity when it relates to budget, when it relates to approvals, when it relates to bottlenecks. Critical to understand the status and the approvals of what's happened, and also for accountability. Once you start creating visibility and a single source of truth, the behavior changes, because what happens and the level of coming back to those who have approved or committed to the work, once it's transparent for all to see, it's much less easy for individuals to hide behind "that wasn't my decision" or "we made it by committee." When you have a timestamp and a certain individual's name or accountability against it, the behavior changes. The incentive is towards quality, maybe not necessarily speed, but in a number of these things, we would probably take quality over speed, or the right sizing over getting something, just getting something done, because the ramifications downstream, and we can cite a number of examples, and for the respect of the bad cases, I don't want to go into it now and sully the story. And then also, as we go through the requirements for compliance, for auditing, for reporting, whether that be health and safety, whether that be finance, whether that be procurement, the requirements to track that through the life cycle of a project and even beyond is very clear for all to see. So I will not labor the point anymore. There are clearly the areas and specific types of contracts where the technologies like blockchain, or where digitization and automation can provide benefit, are pretty clear. It's around performance management. It's about tracking of work progress, be able to reduce the likelihood of disputes. I wouldn't say it's about dispute management, but specifically about reducing the likelihood of them happening in the first place. I'm going to go straight into the key part of my presentation here, because I think Daria already covered this much better than I can. The smart contract itself, and whether you use it as a contract or whether you just use it as smart contracts in blockchain terms or smart legal contracts, it's about delivering the automation. The business will define what we automate. So as you're thinking about, do I need a smart legal contract, or do I just need automation? Do I actually have to append legality or legally binding terms to this, or is it just enough to move things further down the line to be able to make progress to save cost? Is it actually going to take me longer to transform if I make it legal, or do I just need to make it faster and digitized? And this is the critically important part. And the lawyers will help us to define the contractual considerations. And this is the critically important role. And while I don't want any of my legal friends to do themselves out of a job, the critical challenge in all of the questions or the use cases that we've been talking about today is, do we just want automation, or do we want legal automation? And is it enough to do the first without the second? So lawyer up, because we're about to go on a journey. And I'm about to use possibly one of the most obscure visual representation methods that I've used in my career, but it's Thursday, 3 o'clock, and I'm going to do it anyway. First things first. So within IBM, we have what we look at, the blockchain network design framework, which, as I said at the beginning of the show, there are 3 critical components to delivering any platform or transformation using blockchain as a technology. It's around the governance design. So how do we agree the roles of the different parties? What are the rules? What are the parameters against which we're going to come together? Whether that be contractual, whether that be funding, whether that be antitrust, or at least an understanding of antitrust, and the rules to change the rules, right? 12 months from now, we might be in a very different position than we are now. The business value design, why are we doing it? What are we trying to achieve? What is this particular initiative or group of individuals or consortium or new business venture? What is the opportunity? What is the size of the prize? What are the commercial drivers, and what are the commercial obligations? And then obviously the technology, which everybody assumes is the bit that always happens, but actually you need to have all 3. And as you walk through this, I'm going to use my visual representation of a lawyer. In this case, I could call it the Harvey spectrometer, but I'm actually going to call it Harvey balls, because that's the best pun I could come up with at the time. As we go through this, in governance design, there are some kind of critical heavy lifting points around the role of the lawyer. Obviously, the founder engagement, helping to get the founders together and agreed on the roles of the participants and that they're legally covered, critically important. But if you look at the governing charter for the consortium, that is almost all legal work. It's not legal smart contracts, but it's a significant amount of legal work. And then as you expand beyond that into onboarding new participants, onboarding, offboarding, and changing the rules, it could be 1, it could be 3 Harveys. But that gives you a little bit of a center of gravity around governance. In terms of business value design, the initial opportunity assessments, the market assessment, by and large, you can do that desktop, right? That's more or less about, do we agree on the certain parameters for what would be attractive to us to invest behind this technology? But if you actually start getting towards the business model, if you start looking at share agreements, if you start looking at funding models, again, very heavy center of gravity around legal support, around establishing. And then when you look at the technology design, this is where it gets really interesting, is that actually, and surprisingly, you need legal input pretty much throughout. If you're looking at getting validation around contracting for platforms, if you're doing RFPs, if you're looking at designing and deploying a minimum viable product that's legally compliant with terms and conditions, getting into a production pilot, and then eventually evolving the platform and scaling, you are just ramping up the requirement for legal guidance and legal support, whether that be around assurance for smart contracts, if you're doing the legal smart contracts or just the smart contracts themselves, the platform agreements, the technology agreements, the as a service requirements, the commercial agreements outwards. If you're selling your technology platform to other participants in the industry, there is an awful lot of Harvey in this diagram. Good news for our legal friends, but also something that I guess those who don't spend as much time working with blockchain technology may not appreciate. I'm now going to break it down a slightly different way. So this was more around the process and the journey across governance, business value, and technology design. What I want to say is that in construction, there are probably 3 or 4 of the centers of gravity that are more common in terms of use cases. Digital identity or certification, the single source of truth, the repository, the reporting platform, the validation of activity, could be around completions, and then settlement and reconciliation. So this is the sort of the mundane payments and accounting part of it. And here's how I think it plays out. You know, digital identity certification, where it relates to identity and privacy, or it relates to certification of activity, which, you know, there's a liability against. That's 3 Harvey balls. That's a lot of Harvey. You know, there's quite a lot of legal input there required. Single source of truth reporting, it could just purely be about aggregating data. So at a simple level, you can deliver a reporting platform with relatively speaking, less legal engagement. The validation of activity, completions, again, specifically where there are contractual obligations against that or payments held against it or liability, that's somewhere where you're going to want a significant amount of more support from your legal team. And then the final one, And this is where it gets interesting. Settlement and reconciliation, if you're just talking about automation, if you're just automating collection of reporting data to be able to do your accounting or your reconciliation at the end of the process, it's actually probably a single Harvey. But if you're looking to make that a legal smart contract, you probably want to add 2 Jessicas. And if you want to make that cryptocurrency based, or if you want to do any sort of native currency within the ecosystem, I would add 3 Lewises. Being able to do settlement and reconciliation on a blockchain platform with native tokens is the most legally complex thing you can probably try and do in construction right now. And while it's really interesting, I'm not sure how many of the contractors would be interested to be paid in cryptocurrency or into native tokens. But be mindful, it's possible. But is that the place that we want to start? Back to Daria's diagram about the number of bank and commercial flows. Actually, there's probably a huge amount of simplicity to be gained from being able to manage settlement and reconciliation between those parties. And over the life of a 12-month or 24-month project, being able to do that in a relatively real-time way may mean that you never settle at all, because the reconciliation needs to keep going back and forth between parties. And you can save yourself significant amounts in bank or transaction fees. But remember, you'll probably need a Harvey, 2 Jessicas, and 3 Lewises to do so. Apologies for the terrible analogies, but it's Thursday afternoon. And as I said, this is my visual representation on legal effort. So I'll take you through a couple of examples of real world stuff that we're doing and the amount of legal input we've had so far. The first one being digital health pass. So this is us using blockchain for COVID health certificates. We're working with large real estate providers, organizations, manufacturers, even governments, on deploying an ability to proactively test staff to allow them entry and access into workplaces, onto sites, into areas where it's difficult to socially distance. And I would probably give this one a 3 Harveys rating, specifically because you're looking at data privacy, you're looking at consent, you're also integrating this into organizational workflows. There's a significant amount of legal effort required to support this. It's not a legal smart contract. What you're doing is you're digitizing consent and making sure that there is a digital proof of that. But even so, health data and credentials is still a particularly challenging space to work from a legal perspective. IoT and being able to create sensor data that you can use to support other activities on site. At a base level, this could be a 1 Harvey story. You could say, actually, for compliance purposes, I'm going to put up a temperature or sound or a visual inspection drone or camera somewhere on site, so I can make sure that I'm not going above the required amount of noise at a certain point in time. That can be used as an oracle into a system and is actually legally very simple to be able to execute. If you tie that to and Balint, who's going to be speaking tomorrow, will probably give a great presentation on some of the examples of how this can work. But if you're using drones or you're using visual or video information to then be able to monitor progress and make payments, much more complicated. I'm conscious I'm coming to time, so I'm going to give one more quick example. And this is around contingent labor. And IBM itself, we've been using this platform since 2018, and we built a blockchain platform to work with IBM's own suppliers, which are in the hundreds of thousands worldwide. And about 99% of the contract labor that we source as IBM worldwide runs through this contingent labor platform. And this is about being able to settle and reconcile invoices and payments between those parties worldwide. And rather than having lots and lots of individual processes, as you see down the left-hand side, lots of point-to-point emails and information exchanges, being able to have a single source of truth between that information, the ledger of activity, and then the finance and payments settlement at the end. In reality, this is a distributed ledger. There are approvals on the system for the amount of hours worked, the purchase order that's been initiated, and then eventually the payment. It's more of a workflow system than it is an automated settlement and reconciliation platform. So in this case, I would probably give it 1.5 or 1 to 2 Harveys. This is certainly not the 6 Harveys where you've got domestic currencies, tokens and balances and wallets going on. But to give you a flavor of the types of platforms that we're looking at and those that, again, are relevant and being used in this particular sector, I'm going to leave you with my final point, which is for all of the sexy use cases and the IoT and the 5G and the quantum computing and the smart legal contracts and all of the excitement that we can very easily get caught up in blockchain, let's first remember that if we want to scale these use cases further, and this has been put beautifully by Alison McCauley, second shameless plug of the day, but it's my last one, we need to celebrate the mundane usefulness of blockchain. For all the things it could do, for all of the amazing use cases that are technically feasible, let's not forget that the governance, the physical process transformation, and even the cost has to be justified in practice. And if that's about managing billing and reconciliation at the end of a month, there's still millions and millions in cash flow or manual effort or disputes to be taken out of a system that way. If it's about just providing transparency and reducing liability, that's enough to reduce risk. If it's about getting our staff safe and back onto a work site because we can identify that they have been certified or that they have been tested or they're clear to work, that's enough, because the cost of not having that is so significant in and of itself that all the future use cases may build off that. Let's start with mundane and let's have meaningful impact and transform the things that we know we can do today. That's all from me. Leo, back to you.